Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
So I couldn't decide what I want to title this show today. It's either Missing from the Negotiating Table and Military Coups, or Family Feud in Jordan and Iran, the gorilla in the corner. I don't know. By the time I write this up after the show, I'll decide what title I'm going to use. But both of them are apt in what we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of news going on internationally, the Iran deal, and I know it might sound boring and yawn to a lot of people, but actually we're talking about strengthening the Dark Lord. You ever read the Lord of the Rings? Just think of it, we're like the Dark Lord, and he's getting a lot of power if these countries go into a deal with him. And guess who's missing from the negotiating table? We'll tell you during the show today. And our neighbor, the fake country of Jordan, again, this actually used to be part of Israel. If you look at the map of the Palestine Mandate, and remember, in those days, Palestinian meant Jews. The Arabs, if you called an Arab a Palestinian back in the 1940s, 1950s, etc., they would take umbrage to it. They would say, I am a Southern Syrian, or I'm an Egyptian. The Palestinians meant that you were a Jew. And if you know the map, Jordan, which is on the other side of the Jordan River, the eastern side, the East Bank, was part of Israel, the land of Israel. In fact, biblically even, the tribes of Reuven, or Reuben in English, and Gad, I guess you'd pronounce it that in English, in Hebrew it's Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, that's where their Nahalah, their tribal lands were. So it was only a political decision by Britain and France after World War I to divvy up the Middle East and make these fake countries. And Jordan is one of them. But it seems that in Jordan they're having their problems as well, in the fake country of Jordan. And that is a family feud and an attempted coup, apparently, that went on. We're going to find out more when we get back.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're talking about being missing from the negotiating table and military coups, which is seems like what happened to our neighbor, as I said, the fake country of Jordan, because this is just something that was divvied up in the Middle East after World War I by the winners of World War I, which were France and Britain. And ever since then, there's been a lot of dictatorships because they have to keep people in line because it's a tribal mentality here. It's not like the West. And we're going to learn more about this and other top news stories of today with our guest, Aaron Braunstein. He's a former U.S. Foreign Service officer. He has worked in Washington, Egypt, Tunisia, and Muslim West Africa for 30 years as part of the United States Foreign Service. Today, he heads the Jewish Covenant Alliance, and you can visit his website at www.covenantalliance.org. Welcome to the show, Aaron Bronstein.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the air with you again. And we should have an interesting discussion this morning that's breaking news, as they say in the media.
Yes, let's talk about it. Whenever there's a country, a neighbor that's unstable, it's always a concern of its neighboring country, which is now for us here in Israel. So tell us about what went on in Jordan.
Well, it's very much a classic case of palace intrigue. When King Hussein passed away, instead of his brother, Prince Hassan, becoming the king, he passed the mantle on to Abdullah II.
Which was his son.
The son, onto his son, exactly.
Aaron, if I can just interrupt for a moment, I just want to remind everybody that King Hussein and his family are not even quote-unquote Jordanians. They were transferred from Saudi Arabia in some type of British deal and payoff, and the British gave him this land to be the king over. So that's important to say for our listeners. Many of them probably don't know that. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. It was when Arabia was being taken over by the Saudi family, and they finally reached the holy cities of Mecca and Medina in the Hijaz. They ousted then Abdullah or his father, in terms of appointing kings around the new British Empire in the Middle East, they created the country, I think 1922, the country of Transjordan. So Transjordan was the official name of the country, Ever HaYarden, the Haggadah HaSmolit Shel Yarden, the left bank of the Jordan River. And created a kingdom for the new Hashemite dynasty. Now, in terms of Middle East politics, one has to remember that the Hashemites, being the caretakers of the holy sites, are reported, claimed to be the direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. And that's a very important factor in all of this. And maintaining that dynasty has been seen as a way of maintaining stability, some element of stability in the Middle East. What happened, though, even though King Abdullah II, or we'll just call him King Abdullah, his half-brother was appointed crown prince, in other words, heir to the throne. But in 2004, just 17 years ago, he transferred that honor to his own son. So there's been bad blood in the family, and especially among the mothers, different mothers, remember. These are all stepbrothers. King Hussein had 4 wives successively. And the mother of Prince Hamza was doing a lot of stirring behind the scenes, and the 2 mothers were involved. But all of this has come to, quote-unquote, a happy ending as of yesterday with a traditional kiss and make-up agreement and signed documents and signed letters where Prince Hamza now swears full allegiance for the sake of the security of the Kingdom of Jordan, full loyalty to the king.
Now, we have to mention that, according to news reports, he was put under house arrest before he made this Pledge of Allegiance or re-Pledge of Allegiance. And there was some story about an ex-Mossad agent who tried to help the Jordanian prince flee. Do you know anything about that?
No, there's a lot of a conjecture as to whether Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, was involved. Accusations. It's always good in the Middle East when you want to attack somebody to say that he's supported by Israel. Even today, after the Abraham Accords, that works. And it works especially in Jordan, where the majority of the population is not of Bedouin tribal origin anymore, but of Palestinian origin. And one of the gripes of the Bedouin tribes, the powers that rule in Jordan, is that King Abdullah, whose mother is Palestinian, is not appreciated by some of the tribes and some elements within the tribes. But you have to remember that behind the scenes, you have all these actors at play in Jordan. You have what I called the gorilla in the corner that people that the media doesn't always refer to, but don't always refer to, is Iran. And Iran through Hamas and Hezbollah, and all of them playing in one way or another in Jordan. Now, there's in Israel, there's two opinions with regard to Jordan. One opinion says that, in fact, it's a colonial, fictitious state and has no real claim to legitimacy in this area, at least. Maybe in Hejaz, if Saudi Arabia, under Iranian intrigue, would come apart, then the Hejaz could come back.
Oh, we lost you. We lost you. Just a moment. We lost Aaron. Aaron?
Yes.
Keep talking.
You hear me?
A little bit. Maybe check your wires, your wiring.
Yeah. Is this better?
Keep talking.
Okay.
Now you're good.
Oh, good. I think the other side is the equation. If you go back 15, 20 years to Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu at the time was asked, well, isn't Jordan Palestine? Theoretically, it is Palestine. But his answer was, no one, under the present circumstances in the Middle East, no one should want the Hamas to come to, based on the Palestinian majority in Jordan, should want the Hamas to come to power in Jordan, totally under the influence of Iran, and then start to subvert the entire Jordan Valley, just as Hamas subverts and attacks the southern Negev from Gaza. So Israel really can't afford, from a geopolitical strategic perspective, can't afford to have anything destabilize the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. So
who exactly would take power if a coup, some type of coup, does take place? Who's next to step in? Would it be ISIS? Would it be the other family members? Who?
Well, there are all kinds of scenarios. So one of those scenarios was the half-brother of the current king, Prince Hamza.
Right.
Maybe becoming a cover. And
for a cover for who?
On Iranian influence and Hamas influence.
So they would turn into an Iranian proxy.
It could be. On the other hand, others would argue that he would be a stronger force against Hamas taking over in Jordan. But in any case, all of this is conjecture There are good arguments on either side as to what might happen if there were a palace coup. But the important thing is what appeared in today's headline, page 1 of the New York Times, and I'll just read the headline.
Well, we have to go to a break.
Palace rift overturns Jordan's stable image.
Okay, hold it right there. We're going to be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Sure.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, Israel's next-door neighbor, Jordan, had what is called a coup attempt, and it seems that they're making up now, and there's going to be some type of agreement between those who are in power and those who want power. And our guest is Aaron Braunstein. He's a former U.S. Foreign Service officer, and he is today the head of the Jewish Covenant Alliance at covenantalliance.org. So, Aaron, in the last segment, you were just reading us the headline this morning, and I'm talking Tuesday morning here in Israel, of the New York Times. What was that again, if you can?
Yes, page 1. Palace rift overturns Jordan's stable image. And all the countries of the Middle East and the Abraham Front, the Abraham Alliance, including Saudi Arabia, came out in support of the current king, King Abdullah II. And for that very reason, the fear that any kind of instability in Jordan, which is so key geopolitically to everything that happens in the Middle East, bordering not just Israel, but bordering Syria and Saudi Arabia, and the access through the desert to and from Iraq. And beyond that stands the big gorilla in the corner, Iran. So stability in Jordan is a key objective for anyone who wants a united front, or anyone who's in the united front against the Ayatollahs in Iran.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this question for a moment, because I like to turn the tables around a lot to look at this. If Jordan is so important for Israel to keep the big gorilla, as you say, in Iran in his cage, not close to Israel, why don't we turn the tables and have, since Jordan is pretty weak anyway, and they've been talking for the past few years that there may be a coup there, that the king is very weak because he's not the majority. He's a Hashemite, and they are maybe 20% of the population of Jordan. Why doesn't Israel take it over? Why doesn't Israel say, for the interests of peace and for the interest to keep Iran, the enemy, at bay, we're going to go in, and Israel, instead of playing defense all the time, go on the offense, and we come close to Iran and make Iran afraid of us, and not always we're afraid of Iran?
Well, I my own view is that Iran would not like anything better than that, because the name of the game is instability versus stability. And Israel is now seen among the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, also a Gulf state, as the key to stability. And Iran, with Hamas and Hezbollah and Syria, and elements and militias in Iraq, are on the side of instability. The more instability, the more they can get their nose, their entire body under the tent. The famous
the camel's nose in the tent, right?
Of the in Middle East folklore,
right?
Of the nose. Once you got the nose of the camel under the flap of the tent, pretty soon you wind up with the entire camel
right
sitting on your lap. And that was, in fact, the metaphor that Arafat used in order to justify his signing for his own people and his own cohorts, signing the Oslo Accords. I even have a T-shirt with exactly that image.
All right. So let's get back to Jordan.
Dome of the rock in the background.
All right.
So that image plays throughout the Middle East, and it is applicable to Western Palestine, today Israel, as it is to Eastern Palestine, Jordan, and beyond. So if you want to play into Iran's hands, then you create greater elements of instability in the Middle East. So I think the Hashemite kingdom should be maintained in that regard, because if it were to fall, and if it were to fall as a result of any action that Israel took, then that might threaten the entire military alliance that exists with other kingdoms. Remember, we're talking about the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia are other kingdoms. And
but
they
these kingdoms also have Iran as a threat.
Shaking things up.
But I'm saying that Saudi Arabia is definitely afraid of Iran. Iran is funding the Houthis against Saudi Arabia, and they're afraid of them. It would seem to me that these Arab countries who find Iran as a threat might welcome quietly, of course not publicly, but might welcome something like that. Anything to see their enemy, weakened.
Yeah. Well, it depends also how you read the Iranian, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the backdrop to the Ayatollah regime in Iran, how you see their agents working throughout the Middle East. And they're working in Jordan too, and they would like nothing better than for there to be a clash between the different populations in in Jordan. Also, don't forget that Jordan took in about over 1 million Sunni refugees from Alawite Syria, if I may speak coarsely. And in that population is a high element of Muslim Brotherhood supporters, Hamas supporters. So that's an additional element that could create instability in the area. Mm-hmm. So once you start stirring the pot, you never know what stew you're going to get. So mm-hmm. the main, most strategic thinkers, most geopolitical thinkers said, don't stir the pot. Leave things alone in Jordan and mm-hmm. And support the current regime, because
better the enemy than
everyone are waiting in the wings to jump in.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, all right. So we'll move past that. I don't know. I think some new thinking could be used here in this region, but okay.
No, you're right. That's why the two of us are on the air.
I just think of myself as a wife and mother. I don't really think of myself as a radio personality. I know that's That's my impression because that's what I do. But I just think of myself as a normal person thinking, why are things this way? It doesn't have to be this way. Okay, so now talking about Iran and its threat, there is the Iran deal that Israel is very hesitant about when it comes to thinking what Biden, the new administration, is going to do. Under Trump, he pretty much stopped that deal. Now it looks like Biden somehow may have this deal renewed in some way and fashion. And this is a direct threat to Israel's existence because it could mean that Iran is going to get nuclear weapons and capability. And they scream it publicly in the streets, death to Israel. They also say death to America, which I don't understand why Biden and his administration don't see that. But what can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a very, very dangerous period. Ever since the Democrats came to power in Washington, and with a divided Congress, the Republicans no longer rule the House of Representatives. It's a split vote there with the vice president as a tiebreaker, Democratic vice president. There's a fixation that Iran, there's sort of a small area of common ground, which is Iran must be stopped from attaining a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons capability. The issue is, how do you do that? The Biden administration believes that the sanctions that were applied to Iran have not worked, and therefore they go back to the old mantra of President Obama's years. What do you want? If we don't have a deal with Iran, you want war? That's always the thing. Do you want war? And the answer of the Trump administration and the answer of Israel was, no, we want to avoid war. And we avoid war by increasing the sanctions. Except there's a problem there. And the problem is China and Russia. They're getting involved. And now China is moving into the Middle East with both feet, with a massive military and economic agreement with Iran. Now, can sanctions work under such increased economic and military support by China?
Okay, we'll leave that question right there because we have to take a break again. Sorry.
Yes.
We're going to be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere. Very informative show. And we're not seeing this news in the news. So it's good that we're learning about this and what's really happening. We'll be right back.
Right.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentako, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Our guest is Aaron Bronstein. He is a former U.S. Foreign Service officer, and he is talking about what's happening here in the Middle East. We've covered the coup attempt in Jordan, and there seems to be a making up and kissing on the cheeks, and we're all good. And but Iran is still a problem, and the Iranian deal, they want the deal renewed, and it looks like the Biden administration is going to passively let that happen. Now, there's someone missing from this negotiating table. Aaron, why don't you tell our listeners about that?
Well, yes, the very ironically, what you have now is the other signatories of the original nuclear weapons agreement with Iran, Europe, and Russia are going to meet with the Iranians. And the representative of the United States is going to be in a side room for consultation. And very, very eerie scenario, because it brings back an image, partially, of what happened at the most infamous compromise, quote-unquote compromise, pacifism, in 1938 at the Munich conference, where England and France and Germany and Italy all met to discuss the fate of part of Czechoslovakia. And the Czechoslovak ambassador was kept out of the negotiations in a separate room and then presented with a fait accompli. Now, Tamar, you hit the nail right on the head when you said in our earlier discussion that this is exactly what the Biden administration wants to see happen.
Okay, so this was off the air, everybody. You didn't miss anything during the show. So basically, let's just give a rundown. Before World War II happened, the European nations wanted to appease Hitler, and they put Czechoslovakia on the table as a sacrifice. And Czechoslovakia had nothing really to say about it, and they were absorbed by Hitler. And you're saying that the same thing is going to be happening most likely today as these nations, France, I think Britain, Germany maybe, are sitting, and Russia sitting with Iran, and America's not at the table, and they may make a deal, and then America will say under Joe Biden, well, that's the deal, so we have to accept it because they really want to accept it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they say, well, the old
We're losing again.
The Biden administration says this is the best deal we could get. What do you want? War? So it made the entire thing, unlike at Munich in 1938, the entire thing may be a setup so that the Biden administration can say the same thing. This is the best we can get. And but behind the scenes, the Biden administration is, I'm sure, working with the Europeans to see what can be presented to the Iranians, what will fly. But in the end, it's going to be missiles that are going to fly, because just like the Munich agreement led to war, agreement that is now being confectioned to restore to the deal, to return to the deal, is going to lead to war. And the key in this is the Abraham alliance with Israel, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, etc. I had a letter published on this in the Jerusalem Post on March 8th, and where I said there is President Biden's attacks on Saudi Arabia, and in particular on the Crown Prince, bin Salman, is all very, as we say in Hebrew, mechushav, all very planned to that there is a clear geopolitical dimension to Biden's actions.
So basically you're saying it's a conspiracy.
To weaken the Abraham alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And the one end, this is the hypocrisy of it, to talk about human rights in Saudi Arabia and say nothing about blood-drenched regimes in Syria and in Iran, where the blood is flowing, unlike almost no blood flowing in Saudi Arabia, to weaken the Abraham Accord by putting psychological pressure on its main linchpin, which is Saudi Arabia. and behind the scenes, working with Israel and with the Gulf states in order to solidify a common front against the real enemy, no longer the Zionist entity, but Iran, out for world conquest.
Now, why would Biden and his administration want to strengthen Iran when Iran publicly, says death to America?
Yeah, well, the more it seems that there's a certain mindset, a liberal mindset, that the more somebody is attacked, the more they sit back, that person sits back and said, what did I do wrong? Why don't they love me?
So you really think it's just naivety?
The naivety,
That's
but
what you think it is?
it's more than naivety. It's a mental frame of reference with regard to the world that sees the world as it should be and not as it really is. And therefore, they come up with absolutely idiotic statements like, oh, but of course they must love their children just as we love our children, and reasonable people can come and cut a deal. After Munich in 1938 and after Nazi Germany invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia, Chamberlain, then prime minister, said, if I would have known that Herr Hitler was not a gentleman, I never would have gone to Munich. So really,
too little, too late.
Herr Hitler was a gentleman and you thought he was a gentleman? The same thing with the Iranians today. It's the same appeasement mindset, and they always have the argument that they feel closes the discussion. What? You want war? And in fact, that's what you get. You get war because, and the real issue today is whether the Abraham alliance will stay solid vis-a-vis Iran, or whether it will break apart because of the actions of the Biden administration, and say, if we don't have the United States behind us, then Israel maybe is not good enough. And therefore, let's see if we can all cut our individual deals with Iran so that in the end, maybe we won't suffer to the extent that the Iranians are planning. And it's a very, very dangerous time. And the new gorilla in the Middle East is China. And the additional, not a new gorilla, the additional gorilla now in the Middle East is China. And it's only by standing strong and continuing the pressure on Iran in Syria and in Iraq and foiling their plots, the Ayatollah's plots vis-a-vis Jordan, etc., that the alliance can be solidified. While China is getting more and more involved in the Middle East, the one good thing is that the government of Israel under Bibi Netanyahu has an understanding with Russia with regard to red lines in the desert. Then people don't realize that only about a third or a quarter of Syria is arable. The rest is all desert, all the way to the Iraqi border. And then Turkey's involved. Everybody is involved in terms of their own interest to destabilize the Middle East.
All right, so Aaron, in the last minute that we have, how do you want to sum everything up and tie it all together?
Well, I'd like to call people's attention again to the importance of the work we're doing at the Jewish Covenant Alliance. It's establishing a new paradigm for Jewish light to the nations, where the issue is the struggle against totalitarian idolatry and not just morality, not just a moral light to the nations, but a forceful light against all forms of totalitarianism that would place either man above God or place religion above God, as the Islamists do. And as you all know, placing man above God were the Nazis and the communists. So it's a struggle. It's for the first time since the reestablishment of Jewish sovereignty that we can talk to the nations and alert them to the geopolitical dangers that confront all of humanity. And that's what we're doing at the Jewish Covenant Alliance. It's Jewish mission to the nations in a way that we haven't been able to promote because of our previous powerlessness. But now people sit up and listen to what Israel has to say. And we want to be a voice, and we are a voice, on the side of those who argue for Israel's geopolitical role in the Middle East and Israel's geopolitical role in the entire world. So look at our website, covenantalliance.org. Write to me, and we have supporters across the world in this effort, and we should only be successful for
Amen.
the Tiferet Israel, for the glory of Israel.
And for the peace in the world. Thank you so
And
much,
for
Aaron
peace
Bronstein.
in the world. That's right. Peace. Ubachartem b'shalom.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Have a choice between good and evil, between peace and war.
Covenantalliance.org. Thanks for being with us.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the Israel News Talk Radio homepage, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.